The Mongol army on the horizon is the herald of terror for any 13th to 14th century nation, but everything you know about them from textbooks is a lie. What they almost certainly didn't tell you is that history even remembers Mongol raids into Palestine. In 1256, Mongols together with Christians made a real massacre of Muslims of the East. In general, some rulers like Hulagu married Christian women and were considered liberators rather than conquerors by the Greeks. Soon we will acquaint you with a history of surprising people, and we will be glad that times of its power long ago have passed, and on horizon will never again appear the army more similar to post-apocalyptic army from Mad Max. Neither the Russian Empire nor the USSR were the largest states on the planet. That was the British Empire with its colonies from the US to India at the height of power. But there was another state that ranked second in the historical ranking, the Mongol Empire, which took a quarter of the planet's territory and population. What associations arise in your head when you hear this name? At best, something associated with unwashed barbarians, nomads, don't you think? History textbooks do a good job, after all. They are written by the winners. Now think logically. Could the unwashed, uneducated Mongols capture and hold half the world? After all, we are talking about the 13th century, when castles and heavy weaponry were commonplace. But somehow the Mongols overpowered the gunpowder-wielding Chinese on the one hand, and crusade-hardened knights on the other, often with an equal number of troops. It's a bit of a mismatch, isn't it? The thing is that Europe, Russia, and Asia are not too comfortable to admit the fact that, in the past, their state and military systems did not compare in any way with what the Mongol Empire was. So textbooks make the guys look like barbarians as much as they can. But in the next couple minutes, we're going to fix that. Prepare to learn how the Mongols became the parents of modern traffic rules, revolutionized siege work, and delivered parcels at a speed that to this day does not even imagine the USPS post office. And Mr. Etsudo Kong will help us in this. Surely the name seems strange to you, and it is true because it gives off a note of Buddhism, which was already spreading in Mongolia, competing with traditional shamanism. Unlike Rome, the system of names in this empire is more complicated, mainly because it consisted of thousands of different tribes, which were united by an ingenious system of management. But more on that from here. Our Etsudo Kong on his horse stands in front of the Great Wall of China. It is 1213, and the Mongolian army clearly proves that in terms of defense, the Chinese wall is not the best defensive structure in history. And the usual joke, what is the point of 5,000 miles of length if the Mongols simply captured one fortress and drove their 100,000 troops over it? Our Etsudo is thinking something similar, rubbing his metal helmet. Yeah, that's right, metal. The Mongols weren't all horsemen with bows. These guys had fine, heavy cavalry. Mr. Kang is armed with a longsword shrouded in iron laminar armor, and carries a huge square shield to protect him from arrows when storming a fortress. The history textbooks are tactfully silent on this. They also omit the fact that our Etsudo is a Noke. That's what they called a typical soldier of the empire. It's funny that, of all the armies from our videos, the Mongolian one is the easiest to understand. 10 Noke like our Kang are a dozen, 100 Noke are 100, 1,000 Noke are 1,000, and so on in the decimal system. The largest army could have 100,000 Noke, but the twist is different. The zest is that all the members of our Etsudo's 10 are relatives, and the members of the 100, which holds the fortress on the Great Chinese Wall, distant relatives or guys from the neighboring village. Genghis Khan, the ruler of the empire, acted cunningly. Like Roman generals, he made up the cells of the army from close people. They are literally ready to die for each other. And at the level of hundreds begins a mini competition, because 100 relatives of our Kang very much wanted to prove to 100 guys from the neighboring village that they are faster to capture their part of the castle, right? And after a joint battle, the neighbors forgot their former enmity and became friends. It's little cubes like this that make up an empire. In 1206, considered the beginning of the great Mongolian state, Mr. Temujin took the name Genghis Khan and issued a code of laws called Yasa of Genghis Khan there, and laid down the division into tens and hundreds, and at the same time in a kind of constitution was prescribed the duty of mutual aid and trust. Cowardice and treachery were suppressed at the state level, and it was also about enemies. Those who stood for their own to the last were respected. Often they were directly offered to join the empire, but cowards who wanted to betray their homeland were not welcome in Mongolia. At the same time, a couple of important points were regulated at the highest level. One of them is familiar to any motorist. Whoever is behind is to blame. Let's say our Etsudo Kong is driving behind a friend and notices his coin purse falling down. Etsudo is obliged to pick it up and return it, as he rides behind and has to watch his friend's back. Even the death penalty was threatened for breaking the rule. Therefore, in battle, Mongols were literally responsible for the comrade in front. And do you know why our Etsudo is pleased? Because by the fall of 1213, China had almost fallen, and that meant that he and his 100 acquaintances would lose a tidbit of land along with peasants and space for nomadism. The chief would be a Noyan, analogous to European princes. He will be required to organize the life of the village and build a postal courier station. Genghis Khan, in that very mini constitution, prescribed that every village should have a post office. It had replacement horses, food, drink, and total defense. Such a post office had already been fixed on the Chinese wall. That is why in a short time the Mongols captured the whole northern China, because Genghis Khan's orders reached thousands and hundreds very quickly, and they in turn were obliged to allocate all the soldiers to the battle at the first order. No one was against it. The booty was not that distributed fairly, but there was so much of it that there was enough for everyone. As you can understand, the Mongols had no problems with logistics and state system. There were even rudiments of democracy, and villagers often gathered to discuss local problems. But the main engine of conquest was still people, because Mongols are warriors from birth.
This video is brought to you by Thorum. Take a look at these rings. They have rings made from 4-billion-year-old Gibeon meteorite and genuine 65-million-year-old T-Rex bone. If you are a fan of Vikings, they have Odin ring, the Norse god of war, the Thor ring, and all of them are crafted by hand. Head the link in the comments and use promo code LIVINGHISTORY to get 20% off a truly unique ring.
Our Etsudo Kong does not remember life without training. At the age of 3, his mother tied him to the saddle and he rode for hours around the yard. At 5, Etsudo already had his own bow, shooting from which he devoted several hours a day. At 10, Kang was already attending hunts and felt better in the saddle than your butt in a chair. The Mongols used stunted hairy horses, which was a killer combination. On the one hand, such a horse is not afraid of cold weather and can pluck grass right on the move. And on the other hand, our trained Etsudo at this moment quietly sleeps right in the saddle. This is another bonus in the piggy bank of speed of movement of Mongolian armies, which was incredible. Where did the backward barbarians get the industry to forge armor and create with single guns, you ask? The secret is simple. No backward barbarians Mongols were not. They had a beautiful alphabet based on the system of Uyghur symbols, which are still used in Mongolia. When storming the Chinese wall, Etsudo Kong and his comrades used the Tangut siege towers, light catapults, and the famous Greek fire. And after the conquest of China, they went full steam ahead. Genghis Khan was a savvy guy, and all the creations of Chinese engineers benefited the horde. By the time of campaigns to the west, the Mongols had already used handheld powder shells, Chinese siege catapults, and even heavy crossbows. One such was manned by 100 men and did terrible damage to the defenders. Trainability was the main strength of the Mongol Empire. When someone saw a promising technology, they immediately learned to use it. The same can be said about battle tactics, which were first borrowed from the same Chinese. Genghis Khan actively used reconnaissance, spies, and never threw opponents with meat, as it likes to draw modern movies. On the contrary, the Mongols studied the enemy, divided the army by sudden blows, ambushed them, and made them as frightening as possible. After conquering China, the Mongols turned their eyes to the west. You all know how that ended, the conquest of the entire Middle East, along with the assassins and other small states. At this point, Genghis Khan was already dead, but our Etsudo Kong could still snag the time to completely defeat the Crusaders. In 1241, the Mongol army effectively wiped out the chivalry of Europe with battles in Poland and Hungary. Byzantium was only repaid with huge sums of money. Half of Russia was burning, and the other half was paying tribute. Mongols once again evolved, taking the most powerful Persian trebuchets from the conquered countries, and the tactics of combat guys coupled with the huge size of the army left no one any chance. On the other hand, logistics and mail worked perfectly well, and the nomadic way of life quietly fed the warriors. If necessary, our Kong could slightly open a horse's vein to drink some of its blood and move on. But what went wrong? The answer is simple. Ordinary human greed, pride, and avarice. Genghis Khan always personally appointed commanders of large units and kept his hand on the pulse of the state. After his death, the mess began. In his will, Khan appointed his son Ugedei as his successor. He was elected, but his younger son Tolui was more popular in the army, and it was the conflicts for power between the heirs of Temujin. Not that they resulted in conflicts, but the development of the horde definitely hindered. So, for example, one of the commanders of the Mongols, despite the death of Khan Munka and the retreat of the native army to Iran, still led part of the army to battle with the Egyptians. Unprepared and deprived of support, the Mongols lost with a bang, giving their enemies a taste of blood. Inconsistencies in management, among other things, led to the fact that after the destruction of the military power of chivalry, the Mongols never returned to Europe. The very Khan Batu from domestic history books, having smashed European armies in a puff of dust, simply left for his homeland because Khan Ugadai died, and it was necessary to run to redistribute lands and solve internecine conflicts. And even despite this, the empire continued to live. Perhaps the most powerful heir of Genghis Khan was his grandson Kubilai. It was he who founded the Chinese Yuan dynasty, which to this day is considered an official part of the history of the Celestial Empire. True, only after the heaviest civil war inside Mongolia, which lasted for 4 years. There was no such thing under Genghis Khan. By that time, the state was a complete mess. Kublai's mother was a Christian, and on the vast territory of the Khanate, one could find any possible religious denomination. In addition to progressive thinking, Kublai divided China into 12 federations for easy management, promoted the ideas of Buddhism, and was a very educated guy. This is one of the main mistakes in history textbooks because the heir of the Mongol Empire is not modern Mongolia but China. If you don't believe me, look in a Chinese history book. Do you know who is listed there under the dynastic name of the founder of the dynasty? Kublai Khan. So the question of whether to love or hate the business that our Etsudokang was engaged in is quite complex. On the one hand, history knows how the Mongols slaughtered entire cities, but on the other hand, they showed the world what can be done with army supply, training, logistics, and science. In addition, many scientists are inclined to the fact that if it were not for the Mongol Empire, similar campaigns to the West would have been made by China. There is also a theory that it was not internecine strife that destroyed the Horde. Recently, historians believe that it was destroyed by the plague, which thanks to the luxurious trade routes spread throughout the empire as if at home. But this is another story, and for now it is worth knowing that the Mongols were not such devils as they are described. Again, we're talking about an era when people were killing each other by the hundreds of thousands for religious reasons, and witches were burned at the stake. So whatever the Mongols were, they are a significant part of the history of the planet, and we should not forget such things. See you again, folks!